Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles. The wind howled outside my empty house, rattling the windows like an omen. The kind you see in movies right before the main character's life gets torn apart. I used to love the sound, used to think of it as something peaceful. Tonight it was just a reminder of how hollow everything had become. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers in front of me. The divorce was finalized, signed, sealed, and delivered. And yet it didn't feel real. My hand hovered over my phone, my thumb tracing the edges. I'd been doing this for hours now, debating whether to call my kids. But I already knew how that conversation would go. They wouldn't answer. They never did. It had only been a month, but the distance between us felt like an eternity. My children, my own flesh and blood, had turned into strangers overnight. The woman I had spent 2 decades loving had poisoned them against me. I wasn't even sure how she did it, but I knew the result. I had become the villain in their story. I ran a hand through my hair and exhaled sharply, forcing myself to look at the divorce decree again. Plaintiff, Sarah Whitmore. Defendant, Jonathan Whitmore. Grounds for divorce, irreconcilable differences. What a joke. There was nothing irreconcilable about this. She had left me for another man, a wealthier man, and when I refused to just disappear quietly, she turned my own children into her weapons. I traced the bolded words at the bottom of the document. Full custody awarded to plaintiff. My stomach twisted. That part hit the hardest. I was allowed supervised visits. Supervised. Like some kind of criminal. I picked up my glass of whiskey, staring into the amber liquid before taking a long sip. It burned going down, but I welcomed the sting. It was the only thing that made me feel anything these days. Sarah had moved out of our home before the ink on the papers had even dried. She packed her bags, took our kids, and settled into the life she had apparently always wanted. One filled with luxury, expensive vacations, and a man who could afford to make all her wildest dreams come true. The irony? I had built a life with her from the ground up. We started with nothing. I worked overtime, sometimes 3 jobs at once, just to keep us afloat while she went back to school. I didn't complain when she wanted to quit working after our first child was born. I didn't blink when she decided she needed a bigger house, a nicer car, or more vacations. I was a provider. That was my role, and I wore it proudly. But in the end, it wasn't enough. It never was. The affair wasn't even some secret, passionate mistake. No, it was calculated, deliberate. She had been seeing him for over a year before I found out. How did I discover it? By accident. I was cleaning up the kitchen when her phone lit up. A message from Ethan Davenport. I can't wait until you're mine. No more sneaking around. Just us. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe some spam message. Maybe a joke. But the way Sarah paled when I confronted her, the way her lips parted in silent horror, like a deer caught in headlights, that was the only confirmation I needed. I still remember her first words when I asked her if she was cheating. It's not what you think. Not I didn't cheat or I love you or even a pathetic excuse. Just that weak, meaningless phrase people use when they've been caught red-handed. I should have yelled. I should have thrown things. Instead, I just stared at her. Numb. I was too tired to fight. Who is he? My voice had come out flat, empty. She hesitated before swallowing hard. Ethan. I laughed bitterly. I knew that name. Ethan Davenport, big-shot investment banker, multimillionaire, divorced twice, with a smile so smug you'd want to punch him on sight. I had met him once at a charity event. He shook my hand and thanked me for supporting Sarah's career. He had been sleeping with my wife even then. The rest was history. She told me she wanted a divorce, but it wasn't up for discussion. It was already in motion. Lawyers, custody arrangements, bank accounts split. She had it all figured out before I even knew our marriage was over. And the worst part? She turned our kids against me. I tried calling them in the first few weeks after she moved out. No answer. Then I tried visiting. The door stayed locked. Eventually, I got a text from my own son. Please stop coming over. We don't want to see you. That one shattered me in ways I hadn't even thought possible. My son. The same boy who used to fall asleep on my chest as a baby. The one I taught how to ride a bike, how to swim, how to be brave in the face of fear. Gone. Just like that. I gripped the glass in my hand, tightening my fingers around it until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't a violent man, but I wanted to break something. I wanted to scream, to demand justice for all the years I had given, for all the love I had poured into my family, only to be discarded like an old coat. But rage wouldn't fix this. Whiskey wouldn't fix this. Crying wouldn't fix this. So what the hell would? I stared out the window, watching as the wind howled through the trees. The world kept moving forward, indifferent to my suffering. Sarah had moved on. The kids had moved on. I was the only one stuck in the past, still waiting for something, anything, to make it all make sense. And then, like a slow-burning realization creeping through my bones, I knew. I couldn't let this be the end of my story. She took my family. She took my reputation. She took my heart. But she would not take the rest of my life. I pushed the glass of whiskey aside. No more drowning. No more mourning a past that no longer existed. If my own children wouldn't look at me as their father anymore, I would make them see the truth. And when that day came, when the lies unraveled and the dust settled, I would be there. Not as the broken man their mother had painted me to be, but as someone stronger. Someone they'd be proud to call their father again. I would make sure of it. The days blurred together after that realization, but the pain didn't lessen. It just changed shape. It wasn't the sharp, gut-wrenching agony of betrayal anymore. No, it settled into something colder, something quieter, a dull, constant ache that I carried with me everywhere I went. I forced myself into a routine. Wake up, work, go home, repeat. It wasn't much of a life, but it was better than the alternative. Sitting in the dark, letting bitterness eat away at me until there was nothing left. But the worst part of it all? The silence. I used to hate how loud my house was. The constant noise of kids bickering, Sarah talking on the phone, the TV blaring cartoons, the endless footsteps stomping through the hallway. Now, it was unbearable in the exact opposite way. The quiet made my skin crawl. It reminded me of just how alone I really was. I reached out to my kids every week. Not in a desperate way, I wasn't about to beg, but just enough to remind them I existed. A text here. Hey buddy, hope school's going well. Let me know if you need anything. A voicemail there. Emily, I saw a book the other day that reminded me of you. Thought maybe we could pick it up together sometime. Each one was met with silence. They weren't just ignoring me. They were choosing to ignore me, and that was worse than anything Sarah had done. Because as much as I hated her for what she'd done, they were my kids, and they had made their choice. Or at least that's what I thought until I saw my daughter at the grocery store. It was late on a Friday, and I had just gotten off work. My fridge was empty, and I figured I might as well pick up a few things instead of eating takeout again. I wasn't expecting to see Emily standing in the cereal aisle, idly scrolling on her phone, a box of Lucky Charms in her other hand. For a second, I thought about just walking past, pretending I didn't see her. Maybe that's what she would have wanted. But something in me refused to let that happen. So I cleared my throat and stepped forward. Hey, Em. She flinched, like I was a stranger who had just invaded her space. Like she hadn't grown up with me. She stared at me, her blue eyes wide. Sarah's eyes, but with none of her warmth. Dad. Hearing her say it made something inside me clench. She still called me that. That had to mean something, right? I forced a smile. Didn't expect to see you here. She shifted awkwardly, glancing toward the entrance like she was looking for an escape route. Yeah, Mom just sent me to grab a few things. Mom. I nodded, ignoring the way the word twisted in my chest. You look good. High school treating you okay? She hesitated, then shrugged. It's fine, I guess. There was a time when she would have lit up at that question, launching into a rant about classes, friends, and whatever book she was obsessed with that week. But now, just fine. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to keep her talking, to remind her that I wasn't some faceless villain in the story her mother had spun. But I knew better than to push, so I just smiled again. Well, It's good to see you, kiddo. I miss you. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't say anything. Then, before I could stop her, she turned and walked away. Just like that, I stood there, gripping my basket so hard my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to breathe. That was the first time I had seen one of my kids in 4 months. And she left like I was nobody. The second blow came a week later. I was sitting at home, scrolling through my phone mindlessly, when I got the email. From Ethan Davenport. Subject: moving forward. I stared at his name for a long time before I opened it. Jonathan, I wanted to reach out personally regarding your continued attempts to contact Sarah and the children. While I understand this has been a difficult transition for you, I must ask that you respect their wishes and refrain from any further attempts at communication. Sarah has made it clear that she wants a clean break, and the children have expressed discomfort with the situation. As their stepfather and primary provider, it's my responsibility to ensure they feel safe and supported during this process. I appreciate your understanding. Ethan Davenport. I blinked. Stepfather? My blood ran cold. My kids barely even acknowledged my existence, and yet they were calling him their stepfather? Rage bubbled in my chest, white-hot and suffocating. I wanted to rip through the screen and choke the smugness out of him. I wanted to drive to their house and force my kids to look me in the eyes and tell me I wasn't their father anymore. But instead, I just sat there, silent, motionless. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be powerless. Because no matter how much I wanted to fight, no matter how much I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops, none of it would change the fact that my own children had replaced me. I put my phone down, exhaling shakily. I had a choice. I could keep trying, keep begging for scraps of affection, keep letting Sarah and her new pet millionaire stomp all over me. Or I could stop. Stop waiting for them to change their minds. Stop expecting them to remember who I was. Stop chasing ghosts. I wasn't a charity case. I wasn't some pathetic, broken man they could erase from existence. And if they wanted to forget me, fine. But I wouldn't be forgotten for long. Because while they were building their perfect little life, I was about to build something even greater. I would become a man they couldn't ignore. A man they would one day wish they had never turned their backs on. And when that day came, when Sarah's lies finally crumbled, I wouldn't just be waiting. I would be ready. I stopped waiting for their calls. Stopped checking my phone every few minutes, hoping to see their names flash across the screen. Stopped driving by their new house like some pathetic ghost haunting a life I no longer belonged to. Instead, I got to work. For years, I had been a husband first, a father second, and everything else came dead last. I had sacrificed pieces of myself to hold a family together, thinking love and dedication would be enough. I was wrong. Sarah had taken everything. My kids, my home, my reputation, and handed my place to another man like I was nothing more than a seat filler. Fine. I wasn't going to be the man she pitied. I was going to be the man she regretted losing. I started with my body. I was never out of shape, but I wasn't exactly in my prime anymore either. Too many late-night takeout dinners, too much stress eating, too many excuses. So I changed that. The alarm went off at 5 a.m. every day, and I got up. No snooze. No second chances. Running. Weights. Meal prep. A full body reset. First, it hurt like hell. My legs burned. My muscles ached. My lungs felt like they were filled with fire. But the pain reminded me that I was still alive. That I was still capable. Every drop of sweat, every extra push-up, every sore muscle was fuel. I could have spent those early mornings crying into a bottle, wallowing in my failures. Instead, I made damn sure that every day, I was stronger than the day before. The progress showed. Within weeks, I felt sharper, lighter, more in control. The man who stared back at me in the mirror wasn't a broken shell anymore. He was becoming something else. Then I rebuilt my career. I had always been a dependable guy, the kind of employee who never took risks. I worked steady hours, put my head down, and played it safe. Not anymore. I started making moves. I took risks at work. Stepping up, taking on leadership roles, pushing past my old limits. People noticed. By month 3, I was handling bigger clients. By month 6, I was in the running for a promotion. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was climbing. And every step I took, every success I earned, it was a reminder to myself, I am worth something. But my transformation wasn't just physical, wasn't just financial. I reshaped my mind. For years, my world had revolved around Sarah and the kids. Every free moment, every decision, every dream had been tied to them. But now, I forced myself to explore. I tried new things, said yes to invitations, joined a boxing gym, started reading again. Books that challenged me, not just the ones that kept me comfortable. And I made new friends. The kind of people who weren't just around because we had kids in the same school. Not couples who pitted me, or coworkers who felt awkward asking how I was doing. Real people, men and women who pushed me, challenged me, respected me. They didn't look at me and see a broken man. They saw a man who was building himself into something unstoppable. The first real test came unexpectedly. 6 months had passed since I saw Emily in that grocery store. 6 months since Ethan had sent that smug little email telling me to respect their wishes. And then one night my phone rang. Not a number I recognized, but something in me knew. I hesitated for just a second before answering. Hello. Silence. Then a sniffle. A sharp inhale. Dad. My chest tightened. My grip on the phone turned to iron. Emily? Another sniffle. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't know who else to call. My heart slammed against my ribs. What's wrong? Silence again. Then finally in a shaky voice. Can you pick me up? I didn't ask where she was. Didn't ask what happened. I just grabbed my keys and drove. Because no matter what had changed between us, no matter what Sarah had told her, I was still her father. And that still had to count for something. I found her outside a diner, sitting on the curb, arms wrapped around her knees. She looked small, fragile, like the little girl who used to come running to me after scraping her knee, asking me to kiss it better. But she wasn't that little girl anymore. She was a teenager, a young woman, and the look in her eyes told me something had shattered. I pulled up and rolled the window down. Get in. She didn't hesitate. She climbed into the passenger seat, buckled her seatbelt, and stared straight ahead. I didn't push her to talk. I didn't demand answers. I just drove. It wasn't until we were a few miles down the road that she finally spoke. Mom doesn't know I'm here. I glanced at her. She was chewing on her lip, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. I figured, I said. You want to tell me what's going on? She exhaled shakily. I had a fight with Ethan. A sharp, ugly satisfaction curled in my chest. But I kept my voice neutral. Yeah. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. He's not who we thought he was. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. What do you mean? She hesitated. Then, he doesn't want us, Dad. Not really. He just wants Mom. Boom. There it was. The lie was unraveling. Emily shook her head, her voice cracking. He treats me and Jason like we're guests in his house. He's nice when Mom's around, but the second she's gone, it's like we don't exist. He doesn't care about us. My jaw clenched. Hard. I had always known, always suspected, but hearing it from her, that made it real. She turned to face me, her eyes pleading. I don't know what to do, Dad. I let out a slow breath. Then, without hesitation, I answered. Come home. Her breath hitched. I don't think Mom would let me. You're 16, Em. My voice was steady, strong. You can choose. And if you want to come home, I will fight for you. I don't care what it takes. Her lip trembled. You'd do that. I laughed. A short, bitter sound. For you? Every damn time. She didn't answer right away. But then, for the first time in almost a year, she reached across the center console and squeezed my hand. And that was when I knew. The war wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't losing anymore. Emily stayed the night. She was quiet at first, hesitant, like a guest in a stranger's home instead of the daughter who used to curl up beside me on the couch and steal my popcorn during movie nights. I didn't push her. Didn't demand explanations or force any conversations she wasn't ready to have. Instead, I made her dinner, real dinner, not the takeout and frozen meals I'd been surviving on. Chicken Alfredo, her favorite. For the first time in almost a year, she sat across from me at the dining table, twirling pasta around her fork. And then, halfway through the meal, she spoke. "I miss this." The words were small, barely above a whisper, but they hit me like a freight train. I set my fork down. "I miss you too, kiddo." She looked up then, her blue eyes shimmering. "I was mad at you, you know? For a long time." I nodded. "I know." She swallowed hard. "Mom made it sound like you didn't care, like you weren't trying hard enough. And when you stopped calling, I thought—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I thought you gave up." My throat tightened. "I never gave up, Em. Never." She studied me for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. And just like that, something shifted. The ice cracked. The walls started to crumble. For the first time since the divorce, I saw my daughter again. The war begins. By morning, I knew what had to be done. Emily wanted to come home. She didn't say it outright, but I could see it in the way she lingered in the kitchen, in the way she asked if I could make breakfast, in the way she hesitated when I drove her back to Sarah's house the next morning. She wanted to stay, but she was afraid, and I couldn't blame her. Sarah had spent months feeding her and Jason lies. She had woven an entire world where I was the villain and Ethan was the savior. But that fantasy was cracking. Emily had seen the truth. And now, I was going to make sure Jason did too. The confrontation. I didn't wait. As soon as I dropped Emily off, I called my lawyer. I wasn't going to be the passive father anymore. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Ethan dictate my relationship with my kids. I was fighting for custody. It wouldn't be easy. Courts favored stability. Custody cases were brutal, and I didn't have proof that Ethan was neglecting my kids. But I had something just as powerful: time. Emily was old enough to choose. And once Jason saw the truth, he would too. Sarah found out about the custody filing that evening. She didn't call, didn't text. She showed up at my house. Furious. She banged on my door, her designer heels clicking against the pavement. Her expression twisted in rage. I opened the door, leaned against the frame, and crossed my arms. "Didn't expect to see you here." She shoved a hand through her perfectly styled hair. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Filing for custody." I said it like it was nothing, like I was discussing the weather. Her jaw clenched. "You're wasting your time." "Am I?" she huffed, shaking her head. "You can't just waltz back into their lives and expect them to drop everything for you, Jonathan. You're not their priority anymore. Ethan is." Something dark curled in my chest. Right? Ethan. The man who doesn't even pretend to care about them when you're not around. Sarah stiffened. I grinned. "Yeah." Emily told me everything. Her face paled. I stepped forward. "So let me be very clear, Sarah. I'm not here to play nice anymore. You can lie to yourself all you want, but you and I both know that Ethan doesn't want to be a father. He wants you, and as soon as Jason realizes that, this entire little fantasy world you've built is going to collapse." She shook. For the first time in months, she was afraid. She opened her mouth, probably to throw out some weak excuse, some flimsy defense, but I didn't give her the chance. I leaned in, my voice calm, controlled. "See you in court, Sarah." Then I shut the door in her face. The first win. Sarah fought. Hard. She painted me as unstable, unreliable, desperate. She claimed the kids were happy, that they had no reason to leave their perfect life. But then Emily spoke. She told the judge everything. How Ethan ignored them. How he only cared about Sarah. How he made her and Jason feel like outsiders in their own home. Sarah tried to spin it, but it was too late. Emily was old enough to make her own choice. And she chose me. The judge awarded me full custody of Emily. Jason, though, he was younger. Too young to make the decision himself. The court ruled in Sarah's favor for now. But I wasn't done. Jason still had to live under Ethan's roof. And soon, he would see the truth too. Ethan breaks. Took 3 months. 3 months of Emily living with me, of Jason seeing what he was missing. 3 months of Ethan slowly unraveling under the pressure of a father's shadow. And then one night I got a call. Not from Emily. Not from Sarah. From Jason. He was crying. "Dad? Can you come get me?" I didn't ask questions. Didn't hesitate. I just grabbed my keys and drove. When I pulled up to Sarah's house, Jason was standing outside with a backpack. His face red. His hands shaking. I didn't even get out of the car. I just opened the door. He climbed in without a word. And then, for the first time in over a year, both of my kids were home. Sarah loses everything. Sarah tried to fight it. She begged Jason to stay. Told him it was just a misunderstanding. That Ethan would try harder. Jason didn't care. He had seen too much. And when we went back to court, he chose me too. By the end of it, Sarah had nothing. No husband. Ethan left. He never wanted kids, after all. No money. Ethan stopped funding her lifestyle once he was free. No family. Her kids were mine now. She had spent years tearing me down. But in the end, she was the one left with nothing. And me? I got everything back. My kids. My dignity. My life. And as I stood outside that courtroom, watching Sarah sob into her hands, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I had already won. Because while she had spent all her energy trying to destroy me, I had spent mine rebuilding. And that made all the difference. The house wasn't quiet anymore. For the first time in over a year, the silence was gone. I woke up to the sound of footsteps stomping through the hallway, cabinets banging open and shut as Jason rummaged through the kitchen looking for cereal. I heard Emily yelling from upstairs, something about stealing her charger again. And I smiled, because this was home. The first few weeks weren't perfect. There were adjustments, hesitations, moments where I could see the ghosts of the past still clinging to them, whispering doubts and old fears. Emily and I fell into a rhythm quickly. She was older, independent, ready to move forward. But Jason, he had been the last to see the truth, the last to leave Sarah's world, and part of him still struggled with what that meant. One night, I found him sitting on the porch, staring at the stars, quiet. I sat down beside him, letting the night settle between us. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Do you hate her?" I knew who he meant. I exhaled slowly, leaning back against the railing. "No." He frowned, glancing at me. "Why not?" A year ago, my answer would have been different. A year ago, I would have said yes. But now, after everything, I just shook my head. Because hating her won't change anything. Jason looked away, kicking at a loose pebble. "I don't know how to feel about her anymore." I nodded. "That's okay." More silence. Then quieter. "I used to believe everything she said about you." I turned to him, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept going, his voice tight. "She told me you didn't want us, that you didn't care enough to fight." And I believed her. A sharp pain twisted in my chest. I reached out, squeezed his shoulder. "That wasn't your fault, Jason." His throat bobbed. I took a deep breath, my voice steady. She was wrong. About everything. Finally, he looked at me. "I know." And for the first time, I saw my son again. Time moved forward. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Sarah tried at first. She called. Sent messages. Tried to fix what was broken. But Jason and Emily weren't interested in the fantasy anymore. They had seen the truth. They had chosen their father. And I had chosen to forgive. Not for her. Not for Sarah. For myself. Because I wasn't going to let my past define me anymore. I had wasted too much time mourning a life that wasn't real. Now I was living again. 1 year later, I stood at Emily's high school graduation, watching as she crossed the stage, her face bright with pride. I clapped the loudest. When she came down, she ran straight into my arms. I held her tight, closing my eyes, breathing her in. "I'm proud of you, kiddo." Her voice was thick with emotion. "I love you, Dad." For a moment I couldn't speak. I just held her. Because that was everything. Later that night, as I tucked Jason into bed, he hesitated. Then, Shyly, he asked, "Can we go fishing this weekend?" My heart clenched. He hadn't asked to do something together since before the divorce. I swallowed hard and smiled. "Yeah, buddy, we can go fishing." He grinned, rolling over. As I stood in the doorway, watching him drift off to sleep, I realized something. I had won. Not in court. Not against Sarah. I had won my family back. And that was the only victory that had ever really mattered. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.